It's time for Security Now, a great big landmark episode. I'll let Steve share that news with you. He'll talk about the 1.2 billion password exploit, bad USB, and we'll answer your questions too. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 468, recorded August 12th, 2014. Your questions, Steve's answers, number 194. Security Now is brought to you by Harry's. For guys who want a great shave experience for a fraction of what you're paying now, go to harrys.com. Get $5 off your first purchase by entering the code SecurityNow when you check out. And by ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter makes hiring faster, easier, and cheaper. Post your job to 50-plus job boards with one click. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial right now at ZipRecruiter.com/SecurityNow. ZipRecruiter.com/SecurityNow. It's time for Security Now, the show that protects you, your loved ones, your privacy online with the man in charge, the explainer-in-chief, the head honcho at the Gibson Research Corporation, Mr. Steve Gibson. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Leo. It's great to be with you again for the final episode of Year 9.
Holy cow. You mean we're completing our 9th year?
Today, if by some strange coincidence, it was actually Elaine who in our weekly conversation where we're exchanging the transcripts, she mentioned a few weeks ago that because of the fact that we had shifted to Tuesday, and you know the phase of the moon and leap years and all that all coming together, our very first podcast we ever recorded was August 19th of 2005.
Wow.
So August 19th of 2014 is next Tuesday.
So there you go. There you have it.
So next Tuesday starts year 10.
That's kind of amazing that we have been doing this that long. It just does not feel that long.
It really is.
What do you give somebody for the 9th anniversary? Is that Bakelite? I think so.
Resuscitation, I think.
Yeah. 9 years. Well, congratulations and thank you.
Defibrillation. Absolutely. Hey, thank you. It's been the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's been
oh, no, it hasn't. Don't say that. But it's the best thing. It's one of the absolute best things I've ever done.
Well, I tweeted to Jen. Jen's up at a yoga retreat at the moment. She does that every summer, and yoga is like oxygen for her. And I told her that today was the end of the 9th year, and I said 9 years. I said that's something. So
that's it. The whole story went to that. Huh?
That's something.
That's something. Yeah, it is. It is something, all right.
As they say these days, that's a thing. I didn't know that was a thing. Oh, yeah, that's a thing.
It's a thing. Yeah.
That's a thing.
I think Tom Merritt and Molly Wood had a podcast briefly called It's a Thing, that they talked about it's a thing. Things that were things.
Those things that become things.
It doesn't. Yeah. It sounds like a tautology, but it is not.
I think I might have first heard it used on The West Wing. It was the kind of smart language that they used type, there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Josh said, "That's a thing?" And it's like, "Oh yeah.
Oh, it's a thing." You're right.
Yeah, you can do that. You can buy one of those, or whatever it was. Yeah. So we've got a great podcast. It's a Q&A, our 194th Q&A.
Holy moly.
We've had a Patch Tuesday, a little bad USB follow-up. We got to talk about the discovery of the CryptoLocker private key repository, which has allowed the creation of an unlocking capability. Then, of course, the news of the Russians, that a Russian group of 20-something hackers who have 1.2 billion passwords and usernames.
I wanted to know a little bit about that. It seemed odd to me.
I have some backstory on that.
Okay.
And then I wanted to talk to you about Google's security biasing their website ranking, which I think is interesting.
Yes.
And LastPass had a problem this morning that they've seemed to have recovered from, but it upset people. And then the question of whether your potato chips might be spying on you. So lots to talk about. And of course, then Q&A.
My potato chips?
Yes,
Not computer chips?
Turns out that a bag of potato chips might be leaking critical information.
I can't believe it.
Yes.
Oh, Lord. Hey, before we go on, I know there's something you like an awful lot in this world.
Coffee? Coffee?
Besides coffee.
Oh.
Well, maybe, it might be one of those things where you didn't used to like it very much, but now you do.
Oh, my God, they're sponsoring.
I'm telling you, he's excited. He's giving them so many free ads. He can't believe they're actually buying one.
And I was gonna say Harry's, except that last time I did, it's like, oh well, no, I shouldn't say that.
No, you
so
won't
now
get
I
in
can.
trouble. You love Harry's.
Leo, I was fuzzy like 20 minutes ago when you guys started doing your picks of the week. I thought, oh, I gotta go, and I just ran my favorite orange handle over my face.
Isn't it awesome?
And now look, I can't stop touching myself now. I'm just so smooth.
I did something yesterday that I had never done before, which is actually dry face, no water, put some Harry's this shave cream on and shaved, and it was great.
No.
I know you usually want hot water, you soften but that's what's great about this Harry's shave cream. It really, I mean, I wouldn't recommend it, but it was fine.
Wait,
I shaved.
And well, how'd you get it off of you? I mean, that stuff really is tenacious.
Well, it is, but you shave, and that's one of the things I like about it is you can really see where you've shaved. And then
if you cut yourself on camera, we're going to have a problem.
Well, and that was the one thing that I've mentioned before, but this is true. Of course, with cheap blades, you cut yourself all the time. And, I can never understand why people buy those disposable, the little blue disposable razors, which are guaranteed to cut you. Guaranteed. The Bics. And then I see people spending like $4 for a Fusion, and I understand why, because it's so expensive to buy the drugstore razor that they're trying to save money. But look, this is your one and only Punim. You don't want to cut your Punim. This is your face here, and I have been using Harry's now. I don't know for how long, but a few months. Not one cut ever. Not one cut.
In fact, if people saw the speed with which I moved the blade over my face,
I believe it. You go.
They would be concerned for the future of the podcast.
Well,
same thing. I mean, look at this. I mean, it's just fabulous, and I just like go zoom, 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 zoom.
I found out what the secret is. There are, it turns out, 2 factories in Germany that can make a blade that won't cut you. Only 2.
There's my handle. That's the one I recommend.
You like the Truman,
yeah, because I like a little more traction with the handle than the fancy silver one gives.
I use the Winston because I like a little more weight. It's it's personal choice. That's why they have both. And I got my Winston engraved with my initials, LEA.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. But I was saying there are only 2 factories in Germany that can make blades that don't cut you. Harry's bought one of them. It was really interesting. Harry's was one of the guys who started Harry's. Jeff also started Warby Parker, and he really has a commitment. He really wanted, I mean, it almost was a quest to create the best shave possible. And he realized in order to do this, he had to buy, this is it, Fine Technic, the factory where they make the blades. So they own the blade factory. 400 German engineers, designers, and craftsmen and production workers they make millions of blades a year, and this is Harry's offers them to you. And here's the beauty part, about half what that drugstore blade costs you. For a better blade and better shave cream, get the Harry's kit, the Winston kit. It'll save $5 on your first order. Just use Steve's offer code SECURITYNOW. Harry's, Harrys. Somebody said you shouldn't say Harry like somebody's got a hairy face. You should say Harry's. Harry's. So you know the difference. Harrys.com. And I guess there's no slash. Just buy what you want. I get the blades every other month, and the shave. I get 4 tubes of shave cream and 8 blades every other month. You'll save $5 on your first order with the code SECURITYNOW. Harry's.
And if you're shaving when you're harried, then you can still survive. You can still survive the process.
I should knock on wood when I say that, but I literally, now I change my blade every week. You probably do the same, but you don't shave every day.
No, I don't. I go like as long as I possibly.
Right.
Normally, I'm an event shaver. I will shave for the podcast. I shave for Jenny, and that's pretty much it.
Well, I shave every morning, and I sometimes shave every night as well. I have a kind of scratchy beard, so I like to keep it clean. And Harry's really is awesome. So,
well, I'm getting, for what it's worth, a more or less constant background Twitter of people who have listened to me raving about my experience and had one finally, and they say, "Wow, you're right." And I got a tweet yesterday that I remember, and it's like, "Yep, there's somebody else." So yeah, it's the real deal. It's the real deal. So, not a big newsy Patch Tuesday. There were 9 bulletins in all. 7 of them were sort of important but not critical. The most severe affected all versions of Internet Explorer, and the second most, and that was a remote code execution vulnerability. Now, what I saw said that it was IE on Windows 8, but when I looked at the Microsoft background, it looked like it was just across the board everything. So, and then the second most important one was also remote execution, and that one was interesting. That was Windows 8 and 8.1, and Media Center TV Pack for Vista, of all things. And apparently, there's some sort of a graphics processing pipeline vulnerability that can allow code to get executed in your machine on those platforms. So, there's and I updated my Win 7 box that it had 10 things that it needed to fix. So it was probably these things from this morning. So, just update Windows as always. We didn't learn a lot more detail from the actual presentation of our 2 German security guys at Black Hat last Thursday when they gave their bad USB presentation. And I don't know that there is a lot more to learn. I've been listening to you talking about it. I watched, I wasn't home, unfortunately, for Twit, but I was able to watch it a little bit on Sunday. So I'm sorry that I missed the opportunity to be there, Leo.
Yeah, that's okay. But, Father Robert Ballecer interviewed the guys because he was at Black Hat. And so if you haven't watched This Week in Enterprise Tech, his interview with the guys is there.
Oh, good.
And it is to me, it's scary. They answered a number of the questions we've been asking, like why don't they just make it with, unburnable ROM? And it's really scary. It turns out in their Black Hat presentation, they demonstrated the exploit, and you can do it from software on a computer. You don't need any special hardware, and that means if a computer is infected with malware, that malware can write to the USB drive, or the USB device, I should say, because it could be a phone, keyboard, mass storage device of some kind, modify the firmware, and unperceptibly, you take it out and give it to somebody. No antivirus can detect it. I mean, I guess you could write one that would maybe detect it, but nothing right now. And there's no way to fix it.
Yes. I've done a little more research since, and there actually is, in the USB specification, the formal USB spec has something called DFU, which is Device Firmware Upgrade. So that is an in-band sanctioned formal technology for allowing a USB-connected device to have its firmware upgraded. So some devices may support that, or they may just use, like their own non-spec style, which you could determine from reverse engineering. And then the other thing that we talked about was and this has been something that you and I discussed, why is the firmware writable? Well, in thinking about it a little bit further, and I did some more research, imagine that you're a thumb drive and you've got this huge, 16 gigabytes, 16 billion bytes of read-write non-volatile grazing land. Of course you're going to take a little corner of it and put your firmware there. why have a whole separate region of memory because it's going to be more expensive, and these things are, certainly cost sensitive. So nothing is more natural than just taking a little tiny edge of the memory map of 16 plus gigs and just saying, we'll load ourselves from there when we start up. So, I mean, you can see why the firmware would be writable.
That's what they also said. Nobody wants to manufacture something they can't fix if they find a bug.
Right.
You have to throw them all out.
Right. And, and then there was some conversation about why not use a security certificate. Well, first of all, the way you would apply that would only be useful for the device protecting itself from abuse. That is, and it would have to have a non-writable portion in addition to a writable portion, so that the non-writable portion couldn't obviously get overwritten. And it would have to check the signature of the writable portion. This is what Apple has gone through with the iPhone. We've talked about this kind of approach. So that's where the device is protecting itself against malicious firmware. It makes total sense for an iPhone to do that because Apple wants to protect themselves from that. But I mean, we're talking about thumb drives that virtually have no profit margin in them, being made in vast quantities in China, and they don't care. They just want to, sell them. So it ends up not happening. And as you said, Leo, as they said, it really is something to concern ourselves about.
It's they said it's undetectable. It's easy to do. It turns out you don't need. I thought you might need some special hardware. You can do it from any PC. And they said, though, don't panic. There's no examples of this in the wild. I had to add a yet. Because I think that, we're not far from that happening. And I imagine that this will create a business for some USB device manufacturers to, make safe USB devices.
Yes, if they're able to start claiming that their firmware is not rewritable, then that's a buying point for security-conscious people. Oh, and by the way, Stina shot me a note immediately after this news happened. I think it was hours after the podcast, saying just so that I knew. And actually, one of the Yubico guys blogged immediately about it, that the YubiKey is absolutely safe. They're firm, though parameters can be rewritten, the firmware cannot be.
There's
so they do
very
not
little
have
storage on those things. But that's just one of. There's several different kinds of YubiKeys, and some can be modified, right?
Stina said no.
None of them.
Again, parameters, yes. Configuration, yes, but not the underlying firmware. I got what she said was that was in ROM. That was, the firmware itself is protected.
Good. That's great.
So, two companies, FireEye and Fox IT, teamed up. They were both doing research in the whole CryptoLocker virus deal, and they were involved in that much publicized infrastructure takedown of CryptoLocker, which we heard about. Well, it turns out that they were able to track down the servers where the private keys were being stored. Now, to remind our listeners, when someone gets infected by CryptoLocker, their instance of CryptoLocker per machine, that is per instance of infection, contacts the server at a quacky made-up DNS name, which is algorithmically derived. So every day there are new DNS servers which the virus is able to calculate, and so the bad guys are putting them online sort of in a moving forward fashion. They look up that DNS address in order to get the IP of a control server. When they establish that connection, they ask it for a public key for this instance of infection. So the server remotely generates a public and private key pair, keeps the private key, sends the requesting malware the public key. It then, as it's encrypting each file, it generates a random number, a 256-bit encryption key, which it encrypts with the public key it's received from the foreign server. And then it appends that or prepends that key in a special header to the encrypted file. So what the victim ends up with is all of these different types of files encrypted with a special header containing an encrypted symmetric key, which was encrypted with the public key, but can only be, as we know from the way public key crypto works, can only be decrypted with the matching private key, which has never left the master evil control server. So at that point, the victim's sole recourse, and this is industry grade crypto. This is the good crypto that's giving us TNO security for cloud file protection and, all the kinds of the beneficial crypto that we talk about turned to a bad purpose. But it doesn't make it any less effective. It can't be cracked. So the only recourse is for the victim to then pay X number of Bitcoin or money packs while that was initially being supported. And we're coming up now on a year. This was a year ago next month, a year ago September, the CryptoLocker, hit the news and we started covering it on the podcast. So it's been quite an experience. So only by paying the bad guys is the private key then sent to the victim, allowing them to run the decryption process, decrypt the headers to get the key that was used to individually encrypt each of the files. So these guys found the repository of private keys. That's what you need. They're not generated algorithmically. There's no way to compute them. You had to actually find them, and they did. And so decryptolocker.com is now online, and it is a UI, a user interface to the database of the master database of individual private keys for every victim that CryptoLocker has attacked. And anybody who has been a victim can you go to decryptolocker.com, give them your email address so that they can email you the private key and a sample encrypted file. And I'm not exactly sure of the process they go through. They could run the sample file against their key database, or maybe there is some identifier in the header that identifies through a serial number, for example, which private key is the correct one. In any event, you give them a sample of any file of yours that is encrypted, and they will send you back the master private key and their own decryption executable, which you then run on your machine to get your files back.
Such good news. That's amazing.
Yeah, very, very cool. Yeah. And it's nice that we have this sort of conclusion to this interesting drama. I'm not sure how many people this will help. If, for example, people went to a backup that was old but had the wisdom to keep their encrypted files, and the old backup caused them to lose some data, now they have the ability to get that data back. So if anybody, for example, had to fall back to a backup or suffered a catastrophic, loss of data, and we were hearing stories about, what was it, like police police stations where all the machines got
in Massachusetts or somewhere. Yeah.
yeah. They just wiped them out.
Now let me ask you. Andy German asked a good question, or Adam German. Didn't they say if you don't pay us in 72 hours, we delete the key?
They did, but apparently that was not the case because they found all the keys.
That's awesome. And so they don't charge for this service at decryptolocker.com, right? It's free.
No, absolutely free.
That's great.
Absolutely free. The FireEye guys said, to help solve the problem of victims' files still being encrypted, we leveraged our close partnership with Fox IT. We developed a decryption assistance website and corresponding tool designed to help those afflicted with the original CryptoLocker malware. Through various partnerships, they're a little coy about this. They said through various partnerships and reverse engineering engagements, Fox IT and FireEye have ascertained many of the private keys associated with CryptoLocker. Having these private keys allows for decryption of files that are encrypted by CryptoLocker. So, and in fact, I have some links in the show notes. There was a really great write-up and sort of a backgrounder about CryptoLocker's last year of history that foxit.com blogged, let's see, 6 days ago. So you could go blog.fox-it.com and probably find it that way too. It was the CryptoLocker ransomware intelligence report. Had neat charts and graphs and geographical information and all kinds of stuff. So if anyone's interested, that's a great resource. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported, and a bunch of other news outlets picked up on the news, that a Milwaukee-based security firm named Hold IT released the news that there was a Russian crime ring that had amassed the largest known collection of stolen internet credentials, which upon analysis reduced to 1.2 billion username and password combinations, encompassing more than 500 million email addresses. This Hold IT, or the Hold security guys, said that by July, which is last month, the criminals had collected 4.5 billion records, each a username and password, though many overlapped. After sorting through the data, Hold Security found that 1.2 billion of those records were unique. Because people tend to use multiple emails, they filtered further and found that the criminals' database included about 542 million unique email addresses. So here's what's going on, because they've managed to figure out a lot about how this happened. First of all, it's a small hacking ring based in a little city in south central Russia, flanked by Kazakhstan and Mongolia, with fewer than a dozen kids in their 20s who have personal relationships, not virtual. They know each other personally, so it's a tight-knit group. They've created a series of PC-based botnets which infect people's computers. And as those infected users visit websites, the bot running in the machine performs a background SQL injection vulnerability test. And if a site responds to a SQL database injection, it's flagged and reported back to headquarters. And then the team goes in and sucks out the entire database. So it's a very clever sort of two-phase strategy. They've got just widespread malware in a botnet, which is probing based on the habits of the users whose machine it is infected. It sits there, and as the individuals visit websites, that's the source of of potential compromised web servers. So background SQL injections are performed to see if the database, if the background, I've forgotten the term, the back room, not back room, the
Back end?
Back end.
Okay.
Thank you, yes. The back end.
Okay. We're getting old, Steve. 9 years we've been doing this.
If the back end database is accessible through the web UI, that information gets sent back. And then this is what's so cool, is that simple test makes this site a candidate. And then humans, rather than any kind of automated system, each one is an opportunity and a challenge. So they go there and use human-driven and analysis to figure out the table name, and all of the record names and so forth, in order to suck this thing dry. As a consequence, the profile of the identities in this 1.2 billion user name and password collection is very different. It's not just Fortune 500, big name sites. It's tiny websites. And when you think about it, that's beginning to be the bigger Achilles heel. Because even though the big guys have been compromised, they've got budgets and security teams and all that. But all these mom and pop sites tend to just use drop-in packages, which are much less secure. Turn the key up. And everyone's excited when it starts to work, and they don't worry about security. But the problem, of course, is that to the degree that the typical internet user reuses their logon credentials, the vulnerability is that they've used their login credentials on a site that is insecure, some small little site on the internet, but also use them for their banking site or for for other major sites that really matter. And so as a consequence, we have essentially credentials, email addresses, usernames, and passwords, 1.2 billion of them, that might be repurposed and reused. So that's what's going on behind this news of this massive 1.2 billion large credential database.
I'll be honest, I was a little skeptical when I first heard the story, because Holden Security's charging people a fairly hefty fee to see if they're in the database, right? $250 bucks.
No kidding.
Yeah.
$250?
Yeah.
Wow.
Unless I may be completely wrong, but that was my understanding. And so I was skeptical. Brian Krebs did say, I've seen it. It's real. I know whatever his name is Hold. So Brian Krebs has vouched for him, and I think that's enough for me.
Yes, for me too.
But I thought that was odd.
Boy, that's disappointing. Yeah.
Seems like that, but that's how they make their living, I guess. But
yeah, and I ran across some references to this guy, the Hold security guy, sort of operating the way Brian does. We talked about, how Brian really does spend time. He invests time in the underground. Dealing with this, and I got the sense from the research I did that the Holding security guy is doing the same thing. He's cultivated relationships over time, no doubt using a pseudonym, of course, but he's gotten himself into this and been able to pull out this intelligence. Again, it's a mixed blessing that he's charging that kind of money.
He says, he's charging for the Hold Security Electronic Identity Monitoring and Protection Service, but I believe you has to pay for it to find out if you're on that list. So,
yeah.
It's his business. I have mixed feelings about it. It's his business. In the past, when this kind of stuff has been uncovered, people have published, but that costs money. You put it online, you type in your email address and we'll let you know if you're in the database, that kind of thing. But that costs money, so.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's his right to do that if he chooses to. Now, one of the things that came up, of course, is in the wake of this, sites were advising listeners readers, the only thing you could do now is change all of your passwords on all of the websites that you visit. And it's like, oh my Lord, okay. And and I've had people asking me, do I have to do that? It's like, well, I don't know.
I'm looking at it now. Apparently for individuals, there's quite a few hoops you have to jump through. But Hold Security is saying that they will check free of charge for an individual. So I'm going to try it, and I'll let you know. I'll probably have a but you have to register and give me your email and blah, 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 blah.
So, but except you have to listen to this because we want to talk about Google. So they've blogged that that they're going to, and I don't for our listeners who don't already know, this is interesting. I think that they're going to start adding weighting, WEIGHTING, of search results based on whether sites are supporting HTTPS connections. So what they blogged was, for now it's only a very lightweight signal affecting fewer than 1% of global queries and carrying less weight than the many other signals such as high-quality content. While we give webmasters time, isn't that gracious of Google, to switch to HTTPS, but over time we may decide to strengthen it because we'd like to encourage all website owners to switch from HTTP to HTTPS to keep everyone safe on the web. So I'm of two minds about this, Leo, as I imagine any sophisticated person would be. It's like, well, I mean, this really is Google using their formidable search strength and position in the industry to sort of push a policy onto the web.
Well,
not a bad policy, but still one that's not free. I mean, HTTPS is not free. You got to buy a credential and you got to renew it constantly. And you better not forget, or suddenly no one can get to your site, after your certificate expires.
Yeah, we talked about this on Twit on Sunday as well. And my issue is, for instance, Twit.tv, there's no reason to encrypt traffic. You're coming there, it's read-only to see what's on. Right. Or to get a link, or to find out who Steve Gibson is. Is there a reason I should make that HTTPS?
No.
There's nothing to protect.
No. I completely agree.
And Google says, it's only slightly impacts the weighting, like 1%.
It seems to me you either do it or you don't. I mean, you either weight pages so that they're going to, the idea is they're going to appear ahead of, secure pages are going to appear ahead of less secure. Now, I don't like the tone of this blog post, frankly. I mean, that's what sort of annoys me, is that, like, this sense of entitlement they have. Obviously, they can use whatever algorithms they want, but I liked it better when I first heard this, before I found out what they were saying about it, is it made sense to me from the standpoint of maybe a weak quality metric. Because here's Google. The reason they've achieved the prominence they have is, that the original incredible quality of links inbound to a site, the original Google search ranking algorithm that was brilliant and is, immediately gave Google global domination on search, was that they figured out how to do this. So it seemed to me that maybe one of the metrics that you could mix into a valid search quality result would be, is the site secure? Arguing that better sites will, whatever that means, and that's the problem, is you start getting into this, spend the money to add security. And so for a bot that has no other way, I mean, this is all automated. So here's, the bots are looking at links and trying to not be spammed and looking at, keywords and all the different things that the Google system uses. So it made sense to me that whether the pages are being delivered over a secure connection could be one more signal, as they use the term, to help in ranking a site. But the idea that they're saying, well, we want to this is literally being done because we're going to force security on the web by down ranking sites that don't have it. It's like, okay.
And we support HTTPS everywhere. We talk about that, and we've talked about it before, and we think it's a good thing. But to change search rankings based on that seems odd.
Yeah. It seems a little bit like they're pushing a policy.
One thing, which they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
One thing that could maybe make this better is if they became a certificate authority and started issuing free TLS certificates. How about that?
Say that they didn't like colored backgrounds.
Right.
It's
right. You've got an animated GIF on that front page. We're going to downgrade you.
And we think we need white. We really don't want any color. So it's like, okay. Again, in general, it seems like it's a good thing.
What could be wrong?
But security's not free.
Right.
It's not free. And so we're saying you got to pay money. Now you got to pay money in order to compete in Google rankings, is what this comes down to.
How much is it? Now, you get an extended cert, which is very expensive. But how much
I do it's several $100s.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm just a blogger, I'm not going to pay several $100s every few years. I'm not making that much money. I'm just doing this for fun.
And most don't. It's why we're still in a world where security is there when you need it, when you want some credential protection, but otherwise it's not. And remember, from time to time, when these certs expire, I mean,
it'll break things.
There's significant overhead that it never goes away. Yeah. Where you got to remember that to pay your money every couple of years. Anyway, so I mean, there are. What is it? Start TLS, I think it is a no. That's an email protocol. There are a couple free cert providers. They don't do any checking. The cert, actually, I'm not even sure that it's recognized now by web browsers.
It's no better than a self-signed cert.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's not going to help either. No, I mean it really does say we're gonna make you pay in order to have comparable page ranks. And so, I don't know. That seems bad.
Yeah. It kind of bugged us on the panel too.
Yeah.
On Sunday. Hey, I got my official membership at Hold Security. And so now here's what happens. You have to enter in passwords. And they'll see and they'll see whether the password is in the database. It says, we'll never ask you for passwords, except that's what it looks like they're doing. The form below provides you with the ability to encrypt your passwords using SH-8512, which makes it impossible to decode. Once we receive the hashes of your passwords, we'll compare them with the hashes we have and notify you.
Well,
That's okay, I guess.
Yeah, except I don't like this guy.
It feels funny. I'm not going to give him any passwords. So I felt the whole thing felt a little odd. And by the way, Brian Krebs is on his webpage as an advisor. So the whole thing is.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's legit, but it's it just seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. Now he wants to because he's managed to leverage this information, which he has the right to do with what he chooses.
Right.
He wants to make money. So.
Right. And he's now got my email address. I had to give it to him.
I know. That's right. In order to get.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was an interesting piece of news that that I just thought was that I was led to do some research on that indicated that Apple's iOS 8 change where they were going to start randomizing Wi-Fi MAC addresses that we talked about, resulted in a third of a company's employees being terminated. And it's like, what? And Recode picked up on this. It's a company called Nomi, N-O-M-I, which is kind of an interesting, well, because what they are is they're a tracking intelligence company. And Recode said Nomi, a startup that has raised $13 million in venture capital, has laid off at least 20 of its 60 or so employees, in part because of the forthcoming changes, according to sources. And so I dug around a little bit, and we talked about how this a neat feature that would be incorporated into iOS 8 was that before you had an association, a Wi-Fi access point association between your phone typically or pad and that access point, it turns out that it is an industry practice to track people based on their Wi-Fi MAC addresses as they roam around. I mean, that's, with their Wi-Fi turned on. And so there are businesses that that are doing this. And it turns out that's absolutely the case. This Nomi company is installing Wi-Fi systems in retail establishments and selling the service of letting retailers know when people revisit their store, when generating reports for which they pay. And when someone comes back in the store, they'll say, hey, somebody, you're getting a certain percentage of traffic of like every 2 days, every 3 days, every 4 days, and so forth. And they provide that intelligence by seeing that the same phone comes back into the store. So clearly, this is what Apple is saying no to. Well, what Apple is saying yes to is iBeacon. And so when I actually dug down, it turns out that Nomi has switched to deploying Bluetooth tracking, which is easier to set up and requires fewer employees. So it's not that they're
just maybe not the best business model. How about that?
Yeah, that too. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, okay, potato chips, Leo.
Love them. They're delicious.
Yeah, they are. That's the salt. And the
fat.
Together
together at last. And the carbs.
Oh my God.
Oh, my favorite three things.
So MIT has teamed up with Microsoft and Adobe. And at the upcoming SIGGRAPH conference, which is the biggest, it's been going on forever. SIGGRAPH is, I don't know how many decades of years it's been happening, but there was SIGGRAPH back when I was, programming the PDP-8.
20 years at least, yeah.
Yeah. Or 40. Really, it's been there forever.
Well, it stands for the Graphics Special Interest Group.
Exactly. Okay, so this freaked people out, but there's good news here. So the headline was, it was in a set of experiments, these researchers at MIT, Microsoft, and Adobe developed an algorithm that can reconstruct an audio signal by analyzing minute vibrations of objects depicted in video. In one set of experiments, they were able to recover intelligible speech from the vibrations of a potato chip bag photographed 15 feet away through soundproof glass.
Wow.
In other experiments, they extracted usable audio from vibrations of aluminum foil, the surface of a glass of water, like the vibrations we've all seen on, like when Godzilla's footstep lands and we get that, or actually I guess it was Jurassic Park that we saw
here's an audio
water vibrating
example. This is sound played for the speaker in the room.
Video in slow motion here,
and then they took video of the plant leaf which also vibrates, and they recreated it. This is
appear still to the naked eye.
so they were playing Mary Had as a Little
By
Lamb.
combining and
Let me see if I can jump ahead to the actual. That's the sound recovered from the video. It's a little noise, but it's intelligible. I've heard speech. You can actually detect speech.
Okay, now here's the good news. Nyquist is our friend.
Ah, thank God.
Harry
Finally.
Nyquist. Yes. Don't think I've ever mentioned him before. Name dropped, old Harry. You know how disturbing it is when the wagon wheels appear to be spinning backwards
Yes.
in the Westerns?
Yes.
Well, that's, of course, caused by the interaction between the frame rate of the camera and the spinning spokes. What Nyquist observed was that you had to sample at least twice the rate of the frequency that you wanted to resolve. So another way to visualize this, imagine a disc with like a black disc with a white dot out on one edge, and it's spinning. And if you are going to take a snapshot of it, how often do you have to get a snapshot in order to like have a sense, like a true sense for the rotation of the disc? Turns out you have to do it at least twice the frequency or the speed of the disc rotating. Otherwise, you get an aliasing effect, as it's called in sampling theory. So what they failed to mention in the headline is that they had to use high-speed video photography at 2,000 to 6,000 frames per second. And the moment you hear that, you think, of course, speech is in that frequency range.
Like 1,000 hertz or somewhere. Yeah.
Exactly. And so
1,000 kilohertz.
We have our vocal cords, which is generating a high harmonic content, and then formants, as they're called, through our throat, which form bandpass filters to create speech. So you need to have so standard webcams or surveillance cameras or anything is 60 frames maximum, often lower. You see the like still frames with people moving through them because they're trying to minimize the amount of storage that they require. So the point is, no normal cameras can be used to eavesdrop on you. The normal cameras, 60 frames per second, might be able to maybe identify the gender of someone's speech, maybe the number of speakers by doing speaker discrimination within a room, but nothing like eavesdropping on you. It's worth knowing that they can do it with high-speed video. So again, it might be that for a surveillance application, this would make sense, where although frankly we have much better ways to do that. We bounce a laser beam off the glass, and we use interferometry on the round trip distance of the laser beam, and there you get instant real time speech recovery. So this was a little more of a stunt. Interesting that they did this, but it's not like all of our privacy is immediately been breached by webcams and surveillance.
Here's what it sounds like with a 60 frame per second DSLR played back the recovered sound. It's the same, nice. Mary Had a Little Lamb. You get a little bit of something, but not.
Name that tune. For $400, Alex. Yeah.
It's interesting, though. It's a fun little hack.
Yeah. Oh no. Again, I think it's neat that they did it, but the headlines all said, your potato chips are spying on you. It's like, okay, reality check time here on the Security Now podcast. LastPass had an outage this morning. They blogged the blog entry that I saw from LastPass said that at 3 something, I think it was like 3:53 a.m. and I could think that was Eastern time. So for us on the West Coast, around 12 or almost 1 a.m.
I think it was 3
time.
a.m. Eastern. Yeah, noon.
Okay,
midnight our time. Yeah.
Yeah, that something happened. What they said was that one of their data centers, which they clearly depend upon more than I think they should, died, and that unfortunately took out, I'm sure, everybody in the data center, one customer of whom was LastPass. They're back up, and I'm not sure if when I used my LastPass, they were already up. It seemed like their website had a harder problem than their background data sourcing. We'll have to see what the upshot is. I'll see if I can drop a note to Joe and ask him, like for the whole story. Maybe we can talk about it more next week. There was a lot of Twitter traffic.
I saw it. Oof. Wow.
Chatting about this. Yeah. People, not at all happy that their cloud service was out. And so I hope that the LastPass folks will strengthen their cloud provisioning in order to make this less important. Of course, and this is a lesson about the cloud. And this is one that we've discussed here all the time is, TNO encryption, such as LastPass employs, prevents your data from being decrypted and stolen, but it doesn't prevent the cloud from disappearing. I mean, so backing up is a great application where so long as the data is there when you need to recover it. But it's a little more problematical. I mean, the whole cloud model is a little dicey when you need really robust real-time access, like documents online, like editing documents. I've had like spreadsheets sort of lock up on me in Google Sheets, and where it says trying to reconnect. And I think, oh, please do, because, I'm using the cloud. And so there's a mixed blessing aspect to it.
Should you choose to, I should point out, you can back up, and maybe people should do this, your LastPass database. You can export it to a LastPass CSV, which I presume is unencrypted, a LastPass encrypted file, and that you can use in offline mode. So
yes, and there's also LastPass Pocket, which is an alternative.
Yeah.
Which is the same thing. And so, yes, I think if we're going to take a lesson from this, it's use the cloud synchronization. I mean, and we've never had a problem before, but so this is, this was a multi-hour outage, and that can happen. And obviously logging into websites is very crucial for people. I'll note that Squirrel doesn't have that problem because it doesn't use any third-party connection at all. It's just you and the website you want to log into. So we're getting there. And Tech News Today had an interesting piece I just wanted to call our listeners' attention to. And that was there was another Comcast fiasco that you guys covered this morning, Leo.
Yeah.
Where only because the caller had recorded his original conversation with Comcast, where Comcast promised that if he did his own relocation of his service when he was moving, there would be no charge. And so he did that, and everything was fine for a while, and then there were problems. And so somebody came out from Comcast and fixed like outside problems, nothing to do with his own work and his relocation and so forth. And then he got hit with like, I don't remember the number, $181 or something on his next bill. And so he contested that, and they absolutely refused to take it off and said there was nothing that they could do and blah, blah, blah. And he said, look, I have a recording of you telling me there will be no charge. Now, you cannot then reverse yourself and charge me. I have you recorded telling me there will be no charge. So the takeaway, I think, is that you really should record your conversations with Comcast. I mean, that's just like, for safety. They're so bad, you should record them. And one of the guests on the show said in 18 states in the U.S., there is a law called all-party consent, which requires everybody who's a party to a recording to know that. And so I think you should start your Comcast dialogue with the declaration. You should say, hey, I just want to let you know, Comcast person, that I am recording this conversation. So you've been notified that this is being recorded. I know you're recording me, so I just want to let you know I'm recording you too, just in case it should ever be necessary.
Yeah, it's California's what they call a two-party state, and so I do know the law for our state because being in radio, you have to know that. The way the rule is, you need only notify them. You need not get them to assent. Nice. Their assent is inferred from the fact that they stay on the line. So as long as it's clear, if you just say, hey, I'm recording this, now here's what I'd like to do, that's all they have to do. In fact, Comcast doesn't get your assent either. They say this call will be monitored for recording or recorded for monitoring purposes. Right. In fact, most calls, Apple does, everybody does this. So it's fine for you to do it. If you live in a two-party state, which, as you mentioned, many of us do, it's just prudent to say, I'm recording this and continue on. You don't need them to say, okay.
Yeah, and I think from the experience that we're having, that we're seeing, it makes sense. Because, I mean, it can end up being handy to have a recording of their original commitments and promises.
Even if you don't record it, just say, I'm recording this. It might work.
And, don't we know from the first instance, what was it Ryan who had this happen to him?
Yeah, Ryan Block,
yeah. Don't we know that the employee on the other end has a financial stake in the outcome? Yes. And that's what I think is so slimy, is that, they're on the hook for the money they cost Comcast. So, of course, they don't care about, can you imagine? It's like a police officer who starts his career and he's going to go out there and do good, and he's just a neat cop. And after 30 years of on the job, he's just ruined. His spirit is broken. His faith in humanity is destroyed. And that just must happen to Comcast employees after some length of time.
What a horrible job.
Oh, God.
Yeah. You remember the original Ryan Block call, the rep tried to get him to cancel at the Comcast store. So his one and only purpose was not on my watch.
Don't do it on this call.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I announced last week that I had just turned the first squirrel code over to the news group gang the day or the evening before the podcast. It went very smoothly. They found a bunch of, little UI things, like I had back buttons that were enabled when you should not be able to go back, and that kind of thing. Those are all fixed. I just dropped another piece of code yesterday that has the identity export stuff just in file format done. I'm now going to work on the QR code encoding so that I can display the identity on the screen, so you can pick it up with your smartphone in order to transfer the identity to other devices. So we're just moving ahead beautifully with that. And I did find in my mailbag a nice note from Joe White, and he helped me pronounce where he lives. It's Honeopath, and believe me, from Honea path, I would not have gotten Honeopath. So in South Carolina. Thank you, Joe. He said, a resurrection at a funeral home. Okay. And so he said, hey, Stephen Leo, thanks for the show. I've been through the archives and digested them all. He has in asterisks. I'm a funeral director at a small family funeral home. And being in a family business means wearing many hats. IT is one of my hats. One of our main workstations went down a couple of weeks ago, refusing to recognize its hard drive any longer. And of course, we know where this is going. I brought in my personal copy of SpinRite, let it do its thing at level 2, and presto, Workstation began working again. Our massive list of Outlook contacts has been saved from destruction. I've imaged the drive just to be safe, but it appears that the level 2 scan has restored it to useful service. Our thanks to you, Steve, for turning our mourning into gladness. And then he says, I think a site license purchase is in order, which, Joe, I would certainly appreciate.
Yay.
So thanks very much for sharing that.
Yes. Let's take a little break, and we have questions for you if you're ready.
Absolutely.
You've prepared them, so I would presume, presume you are. It'd be like saying, are you ready to drink that cup of coffee now? Well, yes, I made it.
Before it gets cold.
Before it gets cold. So have a sip while we talk a little bit about ZipRecruiter.com. This is their first time on the show, I think.
Yeah.
And they're a great company. We used them when we were trying to fill a position here at the Brick House. The problem when the internet has really changed the job hunt landscape as it's changed everything else. And now with so many job boards out there, you would think, well, it's easy to find somebody. I just go to a job board. But which job board? Everyone's different. Everyone has different, strengths and weaknesses. Wouldn't it be nice if you could post to every job board with a single click of the mouse? Well, you can. I guess you probably figured that out now. ZipRecruiter.com/securitynow. ZipRecruiter will post your job on all the top job sites, plus Craigslist, LinkedIn, and Twitter, all with one click of the mouse. They help you in other ways, too. They'll create a page for you that is about your careers that you can integrate into your website. They'll give you a very simple way to review your applications because, as you might imagine, you're going to get a lot of applicants pouring in. You can find candidates in any city, any industry, nationwide with one single post. But ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface helps you qualify those candidates, screen them, rate them, hire the right person fast. Over 200,000 businesses, including Twit, have used ZipRecruiter to solve that problem. ZipRecruiter.com. They're social, too. Right now, you could try ZipRecruiter free for 4 days. Visit ZipRecruiter.com/securitynow. ZipRecruiter.com/securitynow. You can try it absolutely free. Just remember to make sure that you go to that special page just for you. It really is a cool idea. ZipRecruiter.com. It's kind of like a meta job posting.
So if you're listening to too many podcasts because you are currently unemployed, then
no, this is for hiring somebody. I don't.
Hiring somebody.
Well, wait a minute. No, I'm wrong. You can. You know what? We've never talked about it, but if you go to the job seekers section on ZipRecruiter.com, you can also find a job. We never mentioned that, but in fact, ZipRecruiter works both ways. So, as always, Steve Gibson, he cuts right through to the meat of the matter. If you're listening to too many podcasts, ZipRecruiter.com/securitynow. All right, I'm ready with some questions for you, Mr. Steve Areno.
Yeah, we got a good mix-up today. I think they're good.
This one comes from Twitter at Nick Gustafson. He tweets, what do you use for a password complexity formula in Squirrel? Huh? He's gone beyond my limited means. I need something similar, and I cannot find anything great. So, what does he mean, a formula to validate a password?
Well, sort of. The next question, we'll talk about how we feel about that. Okay. But so here I was, and I mentioned this briefly last week. I wanted the Squirrel needs a password, one password, in the same way that LastPass does, which you use to authenticate yourself to Squirrel. Squirrel will then authenticate you globally and securely, but we need, at this point in time where we don't have on a regular PC, a way of making sure that the client knows it's us, we need to log into Squirrel essentially.
Yeah.
So I prompt the user after they create an identity for a password, which they will use when they want to unlock Squirrel essentially to let it stand in for them and do their authentication. So I think password strength meters are currently the best solution. The problem is, what's a strong password? How do we define that? And when I was thinking about this, it's a little bit about that famous quote from the Supreme Court judge who was commenting on pornography, where he said, well, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And so a password is, originally I was thinking that I would include, for example, a dictionary of 1,000 of the most common passwords. The problem is Squirrel is going to be supported in 60 different languages. And boy, that's a project that I don't want, is generating, finding the most common passwords in all of those different languages. So I thought, okay, I need something simple and algorithmic. I have to satisfy myself with, doing the best job that a simple algorithm can do. So I have a strength meter, and I run a rather simple formula, which I like because I think it does, as the user is putting in a password and experimenting, very much the way the Password Haystacks site operates. It shows you what you've got. And so here's what I thought of. It's a simple algorithm anyone could apply when you're all able to play with the Squirrel client. I mean, they're playing with it right now over in the news group, so it's working, and they've been playing with this aspect of it. I take the number of characters, so just the overall length of the password. That's one parameter. Then I take the number of unique characters. So having more different characters is better than many of the same. It's not just black and white, but that's another parameter, is how many unique characters you have. Then I take the characters and divide them into 5 classes: digits, lowercase a through z, uppercase a through z, then anything remaining that's less than 128, which will be all the other special characters and control characters. And then if it's greater than 128, and that'll generally be, all of the everything else in Unicode space. So 5 classes. Then I count the character class transitions. That is, as you go through the password, how many changes in class. So uppercase to lowercase, alphabetic to numeric, alphabetic to special character, and so forth. So every boundary between classes gets counted. So that's going to heuristically, which is what this is a heuristic. Heuristically, staying in a class doesn't buy you as much strength as changing classes, whether it's case or number to special character to alpha and so forth. And then I have a formula: the total count plus the total number of unique characters plus 2 times the number of transitions, class transitions. And that's my complexity metric, which is shown on a bar graph as the user is entering their password. And it seems to be pretty effective. It's not perfect. I recognize that, but I needed something to encourage people to put in a strong enough password. And in fact, you've got to push that bar up to a certain point in order. It changes temperature as you make a stronger password. It goes from red through yellow and orange into green. changing color and growing in length. And finally, when you get enough, it enables the submit button. So it won't let you use a really bad password. There's no formal, it must be this long, or it must have contained these number of things. That's, as we know, that's a problem, because it provides an attacker with an attack pattern if they know what your criteria is. This doesn't have that. This just says, in general, these are the characteristics of a strong password. And so I implemented that with a rather simple and easy to use heuristic, which anyone could do, for example, in JavaScript if they wanted to help people develop a good password.
You know what? We've never talked about, I don't think, the famous XKCD horse stapler password.
Great cartoon. Yeah.
And you know, the premise of it is that there's more entropy in 4 random common words than there is in a shorter but more random password. Is that accurate? Is that good advice?
No.
I
mean, it's not a bad thing, except that it certainly subjects you to dictionary attack, where you have all those words in a dictionary and you would try combinations of them. There's a lot of them, but it's still fewer than, I mean, again, it's a trade-off.
Would it be better if you added some numbers at the end or used random punctuation between the 4 words? Or?
Yes. Surprise is a good thing, Leo. Think of it as
the word.
Surprise is always useful in a password. So add some surprise.
I guess XKCD's point is at least you can remember correct horse battery staple. Whereas, you know, a random password might not be so easy to remember, but that's what we have LastPass for.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem, of course, is once you acclimate yourself to that phrase, you will tend to use it on all your different sites. And that's not safe either, because the Russians, among their 1.2 billion passwords, is that one with your email address. And if you reused it, they could get into your accounts somewhere else.
Yeah.
In fact, XKCD just did something where he referred to haystacks.
Oh, good. Yeah, because, you know, I think everybody knows that comic, and it's become like lore. It's become urban legend. It's a received truth, and it isn't exactly right.
It's better than, you know, monkey, but it's, you know, it's just basically 4 monkeys in a row.
Carl in Chicago argues that password, as we mentioned, password strength meters aren't such a good idea. All I'll say in terms of praise is I've been a listener since episode 1. That means, Carl, you were at least 9 years old.
Yeah.
When discussing passwords in the past and their use in Squirrel, we refer to Squirrel a lot. This is Steve's very clever and now implemented method of logging into a website, not via password, but by something else, a QR code or the like, right?
We will, as soon as this thing is done, we will do another podcast on it when I'll actually have it, and you'll be able to do it. You'll be able to.
It solves this whole password issue
completely. It's over. It's just not a problem anymore.
The only negative is the sites have to adopt it. We got to get everybody to do it.
Correct.
And that's another challenge. Given there's so many sites where they say it can only be 8 letters and there has to be 1 number. But no punctuation. Anyway, when discussing passwords in the past and their use in Squirrel, it seems like you've generally settled on the idea of having a meter to evaluate password strength. That's one of those on-screen little bars that goes green when you got a good enough password. Generally, I'm not a fan of these for the following reasons. One, I think it probably gives users, especially uninformed ones, a false sense of security and focuses their attention on getting a green bar rather than understanding what a strong password is. I'll actually vouch for that. If I don't get a green bar, I keep going. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to determine if a specific password is actually strong. What may seem like a good password, for example, 1000_Elm_Street number 501, might be easily crackable if it turns out to be based on your address. Or maybe it was generated using a heuristic that can easily be deduced or has been seen or used elsewhere. The simple passage of time may also weaken a password as hardware continues to advance and crackers continue to refine their knowledge from compromised password databases. That's the chief issue with that billion password database.
Yes. Oh, what a trove of intelligence.
Yeah. It's not so much that they got your password, it's that they understand much better how passwords.
They got everybody's password.
They got everybody's. So while we know the qualities of a strong password, it's a difficult thing to quantify. As you said, I'll know it when I see it. Ultimately, the strength of a specific password boils down to one thing. How long does it take to crack it? And obviously, we can't know that unless we try. Consequently, unless we're prepared to run a user's password through today's current password cracking programs and perhaps continue to do so periodically, I think any certification of password strength will ultimately be just too simplistic to be effective. So here's what I've settled on. One, enforce a minimum character set, upper and lower case, for example, numbers and symbols. Enforce a minimum password length, 12 characters or more, for example. Provide simple guidance on what makes a good, strong password, length, randomness, and uniqueness. Your thoughts?
So I don't disagree with any of that. And I recognize that, as we've discussed and as I was just talking about, a password strength meter is a trade-off. What essentially what Carl is suggesting here is the only way to test the strength of a password is to try to crack it. That is, use all of this, use what a bad guy would use in order to crack a password and see whether it stands up to attack, which would be nice if it were practical, but it's not. And in many places, I don't think it's actually effective to try to teach somebody on the fly what a good password is. I mean, so I think a site that enforces a strategy probably does that, exactly as you said, Leo, where you focus on getting the bar green. It's like you just, you do enough until it's
just
satisfying.
Keep typing monkey till it goes green and you're done.
Exactly. So it's like I completely agree that it would be possible, for example, to arrange a weak well, actually, I'm not sure that it's possible to use what I would consider a weak password with my algorithm, because a weak password would have to be really long in order for only the length to get you to strength, because changing character classes is worth 2 points, and unique characters themselves are worth another point in addition to length. So I think I came up with a good formula. I mean, it is a heuristic, but you're going to have a trade-off, because you're trying to help the user protect themselves, but they're not going to stand there and read a book about the science of password generation in order to do that. They just want to get done. And so it's a trade-off.
I really like, and people should rewind and listen to your suggested algorithm. I think you nailed it. Nothing's perfect.
I think it's good.
But I think you got it. And you can tie that to a green bar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I have. I mean, as you're doing it, the bar is growing in length until it's long enough.
Yeah.
And you can experiment with it, and you see the length change as you go.
Yeah, you've been typing letters, you suddenly type a % sign, the bar's going to jump.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes, and you go, ooh, you like that.
Let's try another % sign. Not as good.
Exactly.
How about a number?
Two in a row.
That worked.
Yep, exactly.
Or just get LastPass, for crying out loud. I just, it's all solved if people just get a password manager that generates passwords. It's all solved.
For now, that's a solution. And the reason I don't feel badly for like LastPass and relative to Squirrel is, as you said, Leo, Squirrel's not going to take over the world overnight.
You'll still need it.
It needs to exist. It will start getting adopted. Yeah. And the cool thing is, users only need one copy. You just get it, And when you as you encounter sites that support Squirrel, you can use it.
Right.
And if they don't, then you fall back to LastPass or whatever password manager you've been using. So it can happen incrementally.
I wish you could incorporate, I guess you don't need to, Squirrel into LastPass. Somehow you need a flag in LastPass that would say, oh, it's a Squirrel site.
Yeah, and Joe might very well build it in.
I bet Joe will.
It's simple to do.
Why wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Phil M. in Los Angeles, the city of angels, wonders about best practices for password management. Steve and Leo love the show. My question is about the frequency with which passwords should be changed. After that announcement about the billion passwords, many news outlets recommended that we change our passwords on all our accounts. I think they had the boilerplate left over in the teleprompter. They just kind of pasted it back in. Since no specific companies have been named in this breach, what's your recommended action? And how often should passwords be changed as best practice? That's a good question, Phil.
Yeah, it is a good question. And we've talked about it in different contexts through the years. I've never really understood the logic behind enforced password change. That suggests that there's some long delay between the time that a password escapes your control and it's used. Now, I've seen this in spam. So I don't think the same model applies. I've noticed that old email addresses, which I often still have forward to new addresses, they get spam, but the new ones don't. So there does seem to be some weird multi-year delay between where it takes for things to finally filter out into spam lists. And so if you are changing your email address occasionally, you can stay ahead of that. That seems to be effective. Changing passwords, that seems so burdensome that I don't understand the logic behind it. I know that we've talked about it. Like many companies have every 6 months you must change your password, and it annoys their employees so much that the employees go to great lengths to circumvent that enforced password change because it doesn't make sense to them either. And they've memorized their password, and now they're being forced to change it for no good reason. So I don't know.
It actually encourages bad passwords, I think.
It does. I agree. Yeah.
You add a 1 to your password. It's we've discussed this ad infinitum. We don't need to continue on, but
yep.
There are certain circumstances where you would do that, and I think people just saw that and they said, "Oh, well, a bank does it. I should do it." Not necessary.
No.
But he has 2 questions. One was, do you recommend changing your password because of this breach?
Wow. I feel a little bit like the attorney who always gives advice that errs in the direction of caution because,
it couldn't hide.
It's not your time the attorney is spending. It's, it's not his time he's spending. It's your time.
With Heartbleed, we did recommend people change their passwords, right? On Heartbleed affected sites.
Yeah. And certainly if this was the typical database compromise of a given site like Twitter, it's like, oh, change your Twitter password. I mean, that seems like clearly the amount of effort you go to is going to return safety in measure. But telling people change every password that you have on the internet, oh wow,
no.
Okay,
that's
yes,
what it would have to be.
Do. If you want to be safe from this, if they might have your passwords and we know nothing about which ones they have, I guess you could go to Holding Security and give them all your passwords.
No.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not going to do it.
No.
By the way, they only had room for like 20. I have one for every site I go to. What am I supposed to do with that? It's a useless form.
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt to change your bank password every once in a while. The advice always comes back to use a password vault. Use KeePass or Dashlane or LastPass, which is what we recommend, or 1Password. Then changing it is kind of trivial. So it's a pain. It's a pain, but I mean, if you're worried, change your bank. You don't have to change everything. I'm not going to change my New York Times password, but you might want to change your bank password.
I think there you go. That's it. I perfect. Change the critical ones. And especially if you have not adopted the process or the practice of using separate passwords for important accounts. If you're sharing them across sites so that, when you bought a toothbrush at Joe's, Wooden Sticks site, and you used your same credentials that you use for banking, and Joe's Wooden Sticks site might have a SQL injection vulnerability, because they're just not that security conscious. This is the problem is with this massive breach and the nature of the way these passwords were exfiltrated, the lower security sites are leaking potentially high security credentials. So exactly as you said, Leo, do it for the important sites.
Yeah,
for the crucial sites.
And another good reason to use a vault is so that you don't use the same password. That's a nice feature of LastPass. It'll audit and say, are you using the same password on this site as other sites? Do you want to change it?
Right.
That's great. That's it. And as sometimes I don't care, but most of the time when it says that, I change it and I go, okay, that's a good idea. Not a bad idea. Omega Project actually has the best solution. He says, change your bank every 60 days.
Sorry, no money there.
That'll work.
Welcome to log in. You won't get anything.
Confuse the criminals. Just keep moving. DJ James in Maryland with a personal anecdote about USB in firmware. Your report reminded me of problems several years ago when buying memory devices from eBay. Unscrupulous sellers would change the firmware on MP3 players or USB memory products. For example, they'd take a 2 gigabyte MP3 player and have the firmware report 4 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes, and they sell it at a premium price. Player works fine until you load enough music to cross the 2 gigabyte boundary, and then, of course, files get corrupted as new files overwrote pieces of old one, and the whole thing's a mess. I was burned by one of these players, he says, and by the time I discovered the problem, the seller was long gone with my cash. I dismantled the unit and discovered the fraud by noting that, sure enough, the part numbers on the memory chips allowed for only 2 gigabytes of memory. I found a firmware modification tool on the web and changed the size back to 2 gigs so I could use the device as intended. And wow.
Yeah.
So this guy would have known about this exploit.
Yep. And I thought, so there were some interesting things. First of all, it has been done. It's been done to abuse people.
Yeah.
And there's a firmware mod tool floating around that allows that to be changed for some devices. So there it all is.
It's kind of my point last week, which is that if we had but thought about it, we would have realized bad USB was always a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just like, oh, you mean
fundamentally a problem?
Yeah.
Because USB is so powerful. We are just trusting something. Yeah. We're trusting a computer that we're plugging into a port with lots of privileges.
Right.
Duh.
And it's got writable firmware. Software writable firmware. Phil Zeman's ports are no longer stealth, he's glad to report from Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. I recently moved and had to switch from a cable ISP to DSL. All of my ports except 113 were stealthed with the cable provider. Almost all ports are closed with the DSL provider. I'm using the same router as it was set up for the cable ISP. Anything I can do to get back to stealth? Or is closed good enough?
Okay, so here's what's going on. As we've talked about port 113 in years past, that's the funky port which which your IP address needs to at least respond to in order for some old protocols, some FTP servers, and I think IRC servers will try to do a lookup on 113 when you're attempting to log into them. So they just sort of do a reverse ping to see if you're there. If that is stealthed, you can have problems logging into those servers. So that's why that single port wasn't. That was actually probably Phil's router that was smart enough to handle that correctly. And I remember back in the old days, Zone Alarm was smart enough to handle the 113 non-stealthing. Also, actually, they did adaptive stealthing. They would stealth port 113 unless the firewall saw that you had an open dialogue with the IP where the 113 packets were coming from, and then it would respond, which I thought was, technical Zone Alarm or Zone Labs brilliance back then. What's happening here with the switch to cable, from cable to DSL, is that when you had a cable connection, the packets coming in were actually hitting your router. If not changing your router has switched you from stealth to closed ports, those packets are not actually getting to you, Phil. Your ISP, this DSL ISP, has some equipment which is responding to those packets on your behalf. So who knows what they're doing. They might have a NAT router. You might be natted like in the DSL network so that there's another router between the internet and you. That's actually a good thing. So I would imagine, for example, when you're using Shields Up, that Shields Up is not actually seeing your IP, the IP of your home router. It's seeing the IP of a NAT router where the packets are hitting. It's that NAT router which is not stealthed, it's closed. So you're fine. It really doesn't, it's not you whose ports are closed. It's some piece of equipment upstream of you that is responding to GRC's Shields Up probe packets. And so it's just a different configuration.
And nothing to worry about.
Yeah.
Ashley Black in Reading, Berkshire, United Kingdom. Or is it Berkshire? Knows why VPNs get Netflix working. Hi, guys. I've been thinking about this for a week or two. Following on from the Level 3 Verizon spat, and why users say that Netflix is being throttled because when they try it with a VPN, it works better. Here's what I think is actually happening. As everyone now knows and agrees for whatever political reasons, the Verizon Level 3 peering connection is congested, maxed out. So Netflix is degraded. Then a user starts up a VPN which connects to the VPN service provider over a different peering link that is not congested, and Netflix works from their VPN provider's uncongested connection. So the upshot is the user thinks the ISP is throttling Netflix when in reality you've just basically rerouted Netflix traffic to another provider without a congested path. Regards, Ashley Black, IT security consultant and longtime listener, SpinRite evangelist, etc., etc. That actually makes sense. That's great.
I'm sure he's true.
Yeah.
Many people have asked, and I've just never had an opportunity to mention that if you can change the routing of your packets so that you're not going through that pinch point, you'll be fine. And many people have noted that when they use their VPN, Netflix works fine. And I'm sure this is why. You've gotten out of the network through a different peering connection, and then your traffic turns around and wants to go back in to Netflix, and it doesn't do it through that Verizon Netflix pinch point.
Yeah.
So problem solved.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
It could also be, and this is the original presumption, that your ISP is throttling intentionally Netflix traffic as opposed to congestion. That they're actually saying, "Oh, we're going to turn the knob down on this."
True, and the VPN tunnel would prevent them from knowing that's what you were doing.
That's what people are presuming, is that the deep packet inspection is not happening because I'm in a tunnel, and so whatever they're using, Sandvine or whatever, isn't working anymore.
Right.
It could be either one.
Yep.
Greg in the United Kingdom wonders about TNO cloud storage. I've been a listener for a few months, and the show has been a breath of fresh air away from the media hype of the sky is falling, burn your computers, and live in a cave to be safe. I'm interested.
Well, that might still be a good idea.
Actually,
yeah.
I think if you listen to this show and you really understand what Steve's saying, you might feel that way. I'm interested in encrypted cloud storage solutions. I'm currently using Google Drive with Boxcryptor 2.0 free, as it suits most of my needs and seems to be TNO. However, the free solution doesn't encrypt file names. I'd be more than happy to pay for the product if it saves me from stress. 28 pounds a year? No thanks. I'm really looking for either a one-time purchase or a cheaper subscription cost. I was thinking about using TrueCrypt for a while, but now that I've started to use Boxcryptor, I'm looking for something similar. I have been thinking about this, and I wonder, does it even matter? File name encryption would be nice, but isn't that similar to LastPass not encrypting the names of the sites you stored in your vault? Yeah, an attacker can get the names of the files, but providing you have strong credentials, they have no way of accessing the info. I'm going away to university next month to study computing. So it'd be great to have a solution by then, so I have something in place to store my coursework. Any ideas?
So I actually do have an idea, and it relates to Boxcryptor. I continue to look at Boxcryptor and come away very impressed by the breadth of compatibility and the features. But I feel exactly the way Greg does about having to pay an annual fee for something that I purchased one time or want to use. You know, the whole software as a service model just chafes when I'm just using a piece of software. Turns out Boxcryptor 1.0, or which they now call Boxcryptor Classic, is available, and with a one-time purchase, you can get file name encryption. The free version works and does not do file name encryption, so that's their way of like pushing you to pay them once. I'm coming around to thinking that's sort of the sweet spot. There are all sorts of very cool features that Boxcryptor 2.0 will do for an annual fee, but unless you really need them, then I think this makes a lot of sense. So I would say take a look at Boxcryptor Classic, one-time purchase if you want file name encryption. I mean, and again, I agree with Greg that if your data, you have to decide if the file names of what you're storing you feel are sensitive, then buy Boxcryptor Classic for one-time fee. If you don't care about your file names being leaked, but the contents is safe, you can use the Boxcryptor Classic for absolutely free. But take a look at Boxcryptor. I need to make time to do a survey. I'll probably do that as soon as I've got Squirrel running, so we can talk about these sorts of solutions. But I'm impressed with everything I see from Boxcryptor.
This is what you call pre-internet encryption, or PI.
Yes,
and it would work with any cloud syncing solution, because you encrypt it and then it syncs the encrypted file, not the unencrypted.
Exactly. And in fact, they explicitly support, like everybody. I mean, Google Drive, Amazon, OneDrive, 2Drive, 3Drive, all the drives. So,
and what about SpiderOak? I mean, isn't that trust no one encryption?
It is, but it's a service. So they're providing
you pay for it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I like the separation. I like the idea of separating. Oh, and also Boxcryptor is all cross-platform: Mac, iOS, Android, PC, and so you have access to your cloud hosting from all of your platforms. So that's becoming another important thing.
That's nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Boxcryptor. All righty, moving along. I hear the trucks, but they haven't been around in a while, so
it's interesting. They've been coming later after the podcast, and when that happens, I always think, whew, we made it.
Phil Forrest, Auburn University, Alabama, wondering about bad USB, asks, why no signed firmware? Steve, when I've been reading about the bad USB firmware attack, it seems like this would all be prevented by a signed firmware infrastructure. Furthermore, wouldn't signed firmware also thwart hardware-based USB keystroke loggers? Thanks. Love the show.
Phil Forrest, IT manager, College of Science and Mathematics, Auburn University, Alabama, War Eagle.
So we kind of talked about this before at the top of the show. And, you know, I guess, yes, it's important to understand that the history of USB predates this concern about security. It was all designed 20 years ago, and it was, what was it replacing? I guess serial and parallel ports was the only thing that we had then. And USB came along, and it was like, I remember, you probably do too, Leo, that I think it was a Comdex where they had on a huge table 256
all at once,
like all
Yeah.
in hubs and you know, keyboards and
I do
and
remember
all
that.
kinds of, you know,
Yeah.
cameras and everything, and it was just stunned us all. It was like, my
We were
God,
thrilled.
this is fabulous.
Yeah.
And so, you know, worrying about firmware signing was like the furthest thing from our mind. The fact that it worked at all was, you know, where can I get it? So now we have a standard vastly supported, and it's, you know, unfortunately, it's not secure. I think the solution is non-writable firmware, and companies explicitly making it clear, the way Yubico has, that our stuff cannot be written to, so you're safe from that. And I know if this takes hold, it's going to end up being a competitive advantage. Unfortunately, we'll have to take their word for it, because they could have proprietary means for writing to their firmware, rather than, you know, using the device firmware upgrade spec. So it's a mess.
Yeah, it's kind of sad.
Yeah, but it's the nature of you know, that's why the Cave does sound like a good alternative.
I think it was Windows 98 didn't support USB natively, but SE did. Right? Something like that. I mean, it was a big
You're
deal.
right. There was, I think there was like an update.
A service pack? Oh, okay.
Yes, there was an update that added that, and it was like, oh, this is, you know, great. In fact, that's one of the reasons I moved from NT to 2000. Was that I was still on NT4, and 2000 had like better support for USB. And it's like, okay, fine.
So IronKey, by the way, is saying we do require the firmware be signed.
Good.
But I'm trying to remember from this bad USB presentation at Black Hat. It seemed to me that wasn't enough to make it secure.
I think it's not enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that they've given it some attention.
The problem is that the firmware itself reports whether it's signed.
Exactly. Exactly.
So if you modify the firmware, among other things, what you're going to say is, oh, and if anybody asks, we're signed.
Yeah.
So that's the real problem, is that the communication is managed by the firmware. So if you've compromised the firmware, all bets are off. That's why an antivirus can't detect it, because the firmware says no viruses here.
Well, and an antivirus doesn't have access through the USB interface. Yeah. It sees a hard drive or a keyboard or something. It doesn't know how to look behind the curtain.
If the device itself has a certificate and the firmware you're trying to install on it is not signed, will that block it?
There would have to be, you'd have to have a non-writable core.
That's
you'd
the
have
problem.
Yes, you'd have something that cannot be changed. I mean, the model is exactly like iOS, the notion of bootstrapping. You have a bootloader, which is in ROM, or absolutely non-accessible, non-rewritable volatile storage or non-volatile storage, but cannot be changed.
Otherwise, you just zap the key.
Yes, exactly.
You zap the check.
It cannot be changed, and then that bootloader looks at the firmware, and checks the signature, and verifies that it's been signed. Then the bootloader jumps into that relatively volatile code and executes it.
Now, IronKey is saying, oh, no, our keys are in hardware, but that's not sufficient. The software that does the checking has to also be in hardware.
Yeah, otherwise, you're right.
It's modifiable, and then it doesn't matter.
Yep.
So, you know, this is the problem, is these companies may not be responding fully candidly.
I know. And it's
for obvious reasons.
Exactly.
Harrison Ward in Flower Mound, Texas offers
his home guest network router solution. We were talking about the fact that EFF and others, in fact, Steve Jobs had this idea. All routers should have a guest mode. Why not just use a system like pfSense, pfsense.org, with dedicated NICs and networks? I've been using this forever and love it. Have myself multiple networks so I can monitor, set up separate rules. One for my home network systems, network of things, thermostats, light bulbs, etc. Oh, I get it. The idea of having separate networks, VLANs, I guess, for, different kinds of traffic, media networks, and then a guest network with capture portal and port blocking and a DMZ network for anything shared with the world. I know this is a much more complicated setup, but it does allow for segmentation and high security. We use that here at the Brick House, but more to avoid collisions, because Ethernet's collision-based. You have VLANs for all the different kinds of traffic.
Right. So I just wanted to acknowledge pfSense. Many of our listeners, at the higher-end Linux hacky sort of listeners, have said, hey, Steve, what about pfSense? And it is a beautiful firewall. If you take a PC, which you're no longer using because you've outgrown it, it's only got one core instead of 25. So you give it a couple NICs and basically build yourself a little hardware firewall router appliance. The reason I don't normally talk about it, the reason we were talking about knitting together the blue plastic boxes to sort of, cobble together a solution like this, is that this is much more high-end network, expertise, firewall rules and port ranges, and as you said, Leo, VLANs and so forth. So by all means, if a higher-end listener wants a power solution, pfsense.org, you load that onto, like I said, a PC that's no longer your primary, just sits in the corner and routes your traffic. You can have, if you're into network technology, you can have never-ending amounts of fun with something like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And remember, our first sponsor, Astaro. You could have set up all of this by downloading the free Astaro software, putting it on an old PC, creating all of this stuff. And I'm sure people do, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah,
and
it's a whole different deal.
Yeah,
and so I just wanted to say yes, pfsense.org, absolutely, for the high-end networking guy.
Right. Here you go. Joe Rodricks, our last question in Massachusetts, wonders about home infrastructure for the future. Steve, this is a bit out of band, but I was hoping to get your thoughts. I'm working on building a house. It's 400 feet from my parents' home, and I'm looking into linking the two with fiber. It's surprisingly affordable and doable for a single gigabit link. But what would you do for the actual LAN inside the home? Do you think it's worth running Cat 6? Or will radio and future radio specs keep up with future needs? I assume 4K TV over the internet will happen eventually. In fact, Netflix is already doing it. And who knows what else is coming? Security aside, is wired still better than wireless?
I'm feeling my age because I am amazed by the bandwidth that we're getting now with wireless. I remember when we were, at 1 megabit thinking, okay, they can't get a megabit through the air. No, that's not going to happen. and it's just crazy. Where are we now? 300 megabits, Leo? On
AC, yeah, I think it's 300 megabits.
Wow, and it's
got beamforming, so that's really cool too. It aims at whatever's talking to it.
Yeah, it's got the whole MIMO, the multiple antenna beamforming deal, using phasing the individual members of the antenna so that the nodes cancel out and it's strengthened only in a certain direction. It's just like it's amazing to me. So I think, Joe, my feeling is I'm past the point of being stunned by radio. And I just think the convenience of it, we now have security protocols that make it as secure, secure enough, given a strong password. I'm old school. I've got wire running through. If I were building a home, for example, Mark Thompson did, and he plumbed the entire place for Ethernet cable. So, the the idea that you're building a home and you have the opportunity to run wire, boy, you know, I'd at least run wire to the important areas. Put down Cat 6, like, you know, from like a closet to where you think your entertainment system will be, where you think your computer will be. I mean, so you take advantage of wireless for where you need mobility, but take advantage of wired where you have where you're able to know in advance where your major bandwidth, you know, your non-mobile bandwidth consumption will be, like your entertainment center, your home theater, your office, and things. I would. You really can't pass up the chance of wiring those. But boy, you know, wireless is a great fallback.
Well, the good news is you can always add wireless later. There's you know, if you're building a house, you don't have to do anything to prepare for wireless except maybe not put too much metal in the wall. But you're not going to add Cat 6 later. We use Cat 6 for 10 gigabit here, by the way. So Cat 6 is still a relatively economical, even compared to fiber. At fiber, remember, you got to get switches. You have to have more than just the fiber. You got to get the expensive glass switches.
He's talking about just a fiber backbone between the houses.
Well, but you still have to have a fiber switch at each end.
At each end, yes.
And that's
true.
Lots of money. So I would do Cat 6. In fact, what I really would do, here's what I would do. Conduit. Conduit with Cat 6 in it. But if the day comes when there's Cat 16, you could just attach it to the end of Cat 6, pull it out, and it, you know, rewire. So conduit, I would put conduit everywhere, and I would put Cat 6 for now.
And also leave some nylon
fishing
cord,
line, right? Yeah, just pull it
through the conduit coming out of each end, so you're able to pull things.
Yeah, conduit is really the only way to future-proof it. The other thing is, no matter how fast wireless gets, wired will still be faster no matter what, right? I mean, the same, you know, I think.
Wired, I have to think. I have to believe that. I just can't believe what is going through the air. But also just integrity. I mean, wireless is fundamentally, you know, jammable, right, for example, and just I have a hard time believing what they're able to do. Yeah. But, you know, wires I can believe in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was really thrilled to learn that the Cat 6 we put in here 3 years ago can carry 10 gigabits. We're abandoning our SAN and the fiber that was leading to the SAN and replacing it all with copper using fast NICs and fast storage, and it's great. 10 gigabits is great.
Wow, it's
plenty. It's plenty for our editors.
Listen to us. 10 gigabits.
10 gigabits. We did you know, Russell, of course, wanted to validate it before we did it. He transferred a gigabyte file in a second. 1 second.
Unbelievable.
That's good. And that's hundreds of feet, too. I mean, that's a pretty big throw. Wow. So we want to make sure that the longest, I don't remember what the longest throw was, but we want to make sure the longest throw could handle 10 gigabits. And yes, in fact, we could.
So I wanted to wrap this with just a quick comment. It's been on my mind after looking through the list of presentations at Black Hat and DEF CON, and in the wake of the Snowden revelations, and knowing what it means for today's actually delivered security to be as soft as it is. I've used the term porous before, where, you know, you look really carefully at OpenSSL, which so many sites are using, and you find mistakes. You look really close at pretty much anything which is sufficiently complex, and you find mistakes. I mean, that's the history of this. You know, they look at automotive security systems and the networks now that are operating our cars, and they find mistakes that allow them to open the doors and roll down the windows and apply the brakes and deploy the airbags, unfortunately. Mistakes. And then you look at the NSA and their budget and their interest in finding these mistakes. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we believe despite the fact that the math is absolutely perfect. It's the implementation that is the problem. Mistakes, little things like, ooh, look, that random number generator, we're not so sure about. And they may have helped that get chosen to be the standard. You know, over the last few years, we've seen example after example. And so I just wanted to wrap this 9th year of the Security Now podcast, where over the course of these years, we've really sort of developed I think, a deeper sense of reality. Some people want to go hide in the cave. Others of us are going to go crusading around with squirrels and you know, keep trying to solve these problems in a simple and secure way. But at the same time, I'm just betting that, you know, inside the depths of the NSA, they're not worried, because they understand that their ability to focus on the porosity of the security we're actually implementing in the field gives them an edge. You know, they may very well have already found the mistakes. For example, in bad USB, there's some supposition that Stuxnet may have been propagated that way. I mean, they could certainly have arranged to have compromised firmware in drives that everyone just assumes is, you know, they're fine if they're able to, you know, to physically get them into the channel somehow so that they drift into those factories. So, I mean, I don't think this is gloom and doom. I think this is a little, maybe a dose of constructive reality. It's that we should not imagine that we can really raise barriers that a super well-funded, determined attacker with good intentions, arguably, like the NSA, are unable to penetrate. I think they probably can. I think it's worth us continuing to try to close the pores in security. Clearly, we're finding mistakes and we're fixing them. We are learning. We are way better today than we were 9 years ago at the beginning of the podcast. We as a society, we as a network of people. Unfortunately, we're seeing new things like the Internet of Things, where people are launching products with half-baked security. But notice how quickly we're now catching up and saying, whoa, we need some standards for light bulbs and pasta makers, because you can get up to mischief if you have an unsecured pasta maker in your kitchen. So I'm overall encouraged, but at the same time, I'm having to acknowledge, given the presentations we see at conferences like Black Hat and DEF CON, you know, security is hard, and there really is, you know, there's an inherent porosity to big complex systems. There generally is a way in.
It's funny you should say that, because I've been talking a little bit about that on other shows. That there is no such thing as 100% security or 100% privacy, and particularly on the internet, if you insist on either, you're probably going to break the internet. That right. In order to do that, you'd have to kind of fundamentally undermine what makes the internet work.
Well, and look at the cost that
right.
we are putting the typical user through by requiring a 20-character random debris password uniquely for every site they go to. I mean, that is the only way we have today to be really safe. And wow, I'm completely crippled now without LastPass. I don't know any of my passwords.
Right. Yikes.
And I know.
Yikes. You know, as we found out with Matt Honan, the Wired editor who got hacked,
The truth is, for most of us, if we do get hacked, it won't be because we had insecure passwords.
Right.
So go, have at it. Have great insecure passwords. He did. It didn't. Had he had second factor authentication on his Google, that might have worked. That might have been enough. So there are things you can do. I don't worry. I don't really worry. And I'm, as you are, I think we're targets. Anybody who does a show called Security Now is kind of asking for it. We got a big red bullseye on our back. And knock on wood, I haven't been hacked. You haven't been hacked. I think it's possible if you operate fairly sanely and you don't really have a determined hacker going after you.
I think that and that's exactly my point. Is the determined hacker is like the determined NSA.
Right.
It is we have to accept the fact that we're in an imperfect security world, and we need to decide where's the right trade-off between the cost and the vulnerability. And so I do things like I've talked about, like having like an absolute fire break in my electronic funds transfer, where I force the physical writing of checks across those barriers. It's a pain for Sue, but it's like I just don't want that. I want a fire break there, and so. But as people have noted, it's inconvenient. Then they can't do their electronic banking the way they want to. It's like, yes, I know. But if something gets in your computer and transfers the funds away, then if nothing else, that's also an inconvenience. So, yeah, I think, here we are wrapping up year 9, and we'll have plenty of content for year 10.
Amazing. Well, we're wrapping it up. Next week, our 10th year begins. Jeez Louise.
Yep.
And we've both gone gray doing it.
We have.
Steve Gibson is at grc.com, the Gibson Resource Corporation. That's where he sells SpinRite. You must buy it, the world's best hard drive. Maintenance and recovery utility. It's like 20 years old.
Yes.
This version isn't, but yeah, you've been doing this for a long time. You can also find all sorts of great stuff. Steve has accreted on his website over the past 10 years.
It does accrete.
Like the pearl in an oyster. Every little thing that irritates him becomes a pearl.
That's right.
And you'll find them all at grc.com, all free, including 16 kilobit versions of this show in audio, and Elaine Ferris's wonderful handwritten, handcrafted transcriptions. On our site, twit.tv/SN, we have full quality audio, video in a variety of formats. You can go there or anywhere podcasts are aggregated. iTunes, all the best places have security now.
Or accreted.
Accreted. Aggregated or accreted. What is the difference between aggregating and accreting? I'll have to think about that. Since we've been around 9 years, that makes us one of the oldest podcasts in the world.
Still surviving.
Still surviving podcasts. That's right. And that means we are everywhere. Everybody knows about us. Stitcher. We've got great apps on iOS and Android and Windows and Roku, and thanks to our app developers for making that possible. All independent, hard-working boys and girls deserving of your support. Steve will be back here when we do this again. Next time is Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 2000 UTC on twit.tv. We will see you New Year's Eve, I hear. That's wonderful news.
I'll be back.
We're doing our 24 hours of 2015 once again. We had so much fun doing a 24-hour marathon last year on New Year's Eve.
We've now recovered.
Yeah, it took me a week or 2 or 5 or 100. But, yeah, no, I feel fairly rested after about 8 months later.
Yeah,
but we are
in fact, and you're going to do another whole 24-hour cycle.
Yeah, we started planning and everything, and we're going to do it for charity this time, which we should have done the first time. So it'll be almost like a Jerry Lewis telethon. We're going to raise money for Child's Play and some local charities too. So that'll be fun. And we'll give you more details, but just schedule New Year's Eve day with us, because it is virtually all day New Year's Eve day.
It's a lot of fun.
Thank you, Steve. We'll see you all.
Okay, my friend. Talk to you next week for beginning of year 10.